I think one of the main hurdles to that is that we're not collaborating enough with other sectors and other areas of industry. If you're kind of siloed in your little company bubble, are you really getting the intelligent responses you need from other areas? So this idea of a multidisciplinary approach.
Hello, food chain. This is Sharon Chitun, and I'm a food tech junkie and innovation nerd who loves a good story. This podcast combines all of my favorite vices into a deep dive about the problems our food system faces and the visionary people working on solutions. Today, we are joined by Siân Yates, the Editorial Director of FoodBev Media. There, she leads a dynamic team covering the latest trends and innovations shaping the future of food. With passion for storytelling and a sharp eye on the industry, Siân brings us invaluable insights into what's next right here on the Food Tech Junkies podcast. Are you ready? Here we go. How are you?
Good, thank you, Sian. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. I think talking to the media, it's crucial and not done often enough, in my opinion. So before we dive into all things food innovation, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Siân Yates. I work for FoodBev Media, and we're based in the UK, in Bath, and I am the editorial director at the company. So I have a lovely team of news reporters and editors, and between us, we try and cover as much of the huge food and beverage landscape as we possibly can. That includes writing 4 different magazines, each with its own individual topic. We've got FoodBev, the flagship publication, which is really all corners of the industry. Then we have a dedicated plant-based magazine. We have a dedicated cell-based magazine, and a slightly more niche magazine called Refreshment, which focuses on the vending and the water cooler and filtration industry and the coffee sector as well. Each of those has its own live news desk, so we are reporting every day, trying to get on top of the breaking news as it comes out, and also, really trying to keep on top of the trends and what people are interested in reading about, trying to really engage with people how they want to be engaged with. So my background has always been publishing and writing and editorial. My master's was in journalism, so that was a huge interest for me from the get-go. And I've worked with all sorts of different types of content, from science and technology and academic publishing to writing about luxury chalets and, far away travel. And it's been great. I love the diversity and food and beverage. I mean, I was 50% there being an expert in that I already eat and drink. So the rest kind of came naturally. And yeah, it's a really fun industry to be working in. I'm quite grateful for the topic.
Yeah. And if you think about it, a massive industry, right? Especially in a time where climate and sustainability are top of mind, and we see, such a boost in the past 10 years just about this topic, going a bit outside the traditional food and beverage industry. So let's dive right into that. From your point of view and from what you are sort of writing, the stories that you're seeing, what are the most pressing challenges facing our food system today? When I say that you see, is obviously some we know about, but I think when you are, so deep in the news, you're seeing some things more than others, or things that people talk about more. So
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective and what I see in my line of work, I would say that there are 3 pretty massive challenges facing the food system. First being climate change. I don't think there's any hiding under a rock about the fact that it exists now. So droughts, floods, wildfires, these are all very, very impactful to crop production.
Yeah.
The second, I'd say, is the global population, which is, it's getting pretty massive now. I think it's going to be about 9.8 billion in 2005. And this puts extreme demand on our resources. We require more land to unhouse people or to build facilities that meet their needs. I think that's something we really need to take into consideration from a food system point of view. Then I'd say the third is economic disruptions and stresses. So, thinking more easily things like COVID-19, and although we're now kind of on the backside of that, it's had a huge impact in this decade already.
Yeah.
And then other things like inflation, we're all experiencing cost of living, but also the price of commodities and things like that. That's quite an extreme challenge at the moment. Then there's also conflicts like Ukraine and Israel, which further destabilize the global supply chain and lead to food shortages and price hikes. I do think we're seeing migrant challenges being taken more seriously now. And I think companies and governments will, they'll start prioritizing more certain elements like food waste, like the adoption of sustainable practices, like the diversification of food production, and hopefully that will mitigate some of these risks.
Yeah, so there's a few things I'd like to ask you in regards to this, right? Obviously, from an innovation perspective, we have so many solutions. And sometimes I just get a little bit angry. I'm like, okay, we have all of these solutions. We know what the challenges are, but we're still either not thinking about this from a system perspective, not implementing, not doing, I guess, enough. And if we look at, those three areas that you mentioned, let's sort of start with the last one, right? And we can take anything like chocolate, right? Or, these are very real things that create also not just the hikes to go up, but also disruptions within companies. What do you think we're missing?
That's a massive question. What are we not getting? I feel like this is a bit of a broken record now, but I think one thing that is preventing us from moving forward, like you say, there's a lot of innovation out there, so much innovation that perhaps it's not being best utilized. So I think one of the main hurdles to that is that we're not collaborating enough with other sectors and other areas of industry. If you're kind of siloed in your little company bubble, are you really getting the intelligent responses you need from other areas? So this idea of a multidisciplinary approach, everyone is tackling the same subject matter together, whether you are a manufacturer, whether you are an NGO or a charity, whether you are a healthcare professional, whether you are an academic, whether you are in research and development, science and innovation. There seems to be these silos still, even though this phrase collaboration is key, it is spoken about so often. I feel like sometimes there are a lot of challenges to working with other areas.
Yeah, obviously each company sort of has its own, working for themselves, and I get it, but some problems are cross-sector. And, I'm like, okay, competition, but, we're never going to solve anything if we don't, start getting our stuff together.
We can be competitive together. We're not trying to stand on people's heads to try and get farther. We're all trying to solve the pressing challenges of today. So it doesn't make sense to try and do that on your own without the help of people that might be a bit more knowledgeable in certain areas as you. And I think that is definitely something we have to consider. Not who's going to be the first to the finishing line. It's how do we all get to the finishing line,
Yes, absolutely. Well, to completely agree. And obviously, I'm a big advocate of innovation. Doesn't have to be high tech, like there's many types of innovation and just also the mindset. And there's so much cool stuff out there. Sometimes we're a little too slow in terms of policy, but what are some of the emerging trends that you are seeing that look at sustainability, technology, and also consumer behavior, because that is such a massive aspect, right? Like we talk a lot about technology, but cultured meat, right? Some people, like they pull back, and I'm like, look, how many people were eating sushi, like at every corner 50 years ago, right? It takes time. Yes. So what are those trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I suppose with cultured meat specifically, that's something we're very interested in because it has the potential to change so much.
Yep.
And really hit all those points you want from a product, the ethical side, the sustainable side, making sure your food isn't pumped full of hormones and antibiotics.
Yeah.
That it's clean and it's hygienic and that it can be replicated billions and billions and billions of times. But it's not going to work unless it's accepted by the general public, of course. And that's really just going to come with time. And the more it becomes more of a commercial viability, the more the price comes down, the more people try it, and that kind of encourage people to use it. And that will come with time. But you are right, that's very hugely dependent on whether consumers are going to take it up or not. And you do have quite a lot of backlash at the moment from, ranch heavy states in the US, for example, where, the meat industry is very important. And some places in Europe where, meat and dairy production is a huge part of their culture. So I think it's also about reassuring the companies that are involved that we're not here to tread on anyone's toes. We're just here to make sure that everyone can eat. And, we can't all live off gorgeous cheese and, meat products. Some people need other things on their diet to compensate for those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes, I live in Italy now, right? So obviously we had the whole ban of, which is so ridiculous. And all this misinformation, disinformation, it comes from a place of fear. But my approach to it is A, we need to include farmers a hell of a lot more, and two, make an economic argument, right? Like if we look here with the climate conditions between droughts and floods every 2.5 minutes, that is a big loss for a lot of these farms. So why not diversify, integrate new approaches, and generate different revenue sources, right? And if
Exactly, yeah.
And that is the argument. I wouldn't see anybody have fear. It's not about replacing, like canceling me, but it's about diversification. And I think maybe the conversation, and from a media perspective, like you're the expert on communication. I think from the language and the communication side, there were some mistakes on our part, like on our little industry bubble in communicating that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I suppose maybe the language is a bit too scientific, which makes it feel quite emotionless. It's not something you really want to associate with in terms of your consumption. So perhaps using things like cells and cultivation, these aren't really words that people necessarily want to hear in relation to their food, even though we know that it doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. Cells are in everything, and crops are cultivated. Most things in the food system are cultivated. I suppose in terms of the semantics, yes, maybe they could have been a little bit more thought out and broader and more in use by everyone. I think there's kind of needs to be some more overarching terms that we use.
Yeah, I also think maybe it was a little bit of how we presented it at first, right? Like it was more like this will be something, no more meat. So you have, I think, the industry pushback, but also like obviously not younger generations or people. I'm thinking about maybe if my mother wasn't my mother that has me to explain it to her, right? Like why would we have that, right? Like, what do you mean in a lab? And so words matter.
Mm-hmm.
They matter so much. So what other trends are you seeing? Obviously, in addition to cultivated meat, I would also say fermentation, which is a big one.
Is I think one of my favorites is upcycling.
Oh yeah.
Waste valorization. And I think there's a lot of really exciting things happening in this area. There's a lot of space to be really innovative, and it's a relatively simple way to keep ingredients in this circular economy. For instance, companies like Toast, who make beer from discarded bread, or Discarded, who use things like coffee and wine and whiskey byproducts to make spirit. And I recently spoke to a company called Cafe Bueno, based in Colombia, and they're using coffee waste for some really interesting products, everything from supplements to soil health products and animal feed. I think a lot of people are now using their byproducts to create animal feed, which is great because then the animals that we end up consuming have been fed with some quite nutritional products. I think supermarkets are also making quite a lot of strides here. So retail offering wonky veg boxes or veg for a discounted price if its shelf life isn't very long. My local supermarket, they donate a lot of excess food to charities and homeless shelters. Like you mentioned, consumer behavior, I think that's shifting now too. There are more shoppers seeking out bargains in the yellow sticker aisle that want to waste food, or gravitating towards brands that have a more sustainable ethos. And from a tech point of view as well, I think this is a really interesting space. You have apps like Too Good To Go, which partners with restaurants, cafes, hotels, supermarkets, to offer end of the day items at significantly reduced prices. So you can go into a bakery and for £3, you might come out with, 5 sandwiches and a pasty and and all sorts, and that.
Great.
Another one is Olio. I'm not sure if you heard of Olio.
Had her on the podcast.
Oh, fantastic. Then you know very well. I won't preach to the choir, but yeah, so they connect neighbors together to, they need to share food or get rid of items, connect neighbors with one another so they can do that thing. So yeah, lots of really, really exciting things going on in that space. I love writing about that.
It's a massive opportunity. And you were talking about feed. I mean, to me, it's crazy the amount of arable land we use to. And again, people don't know. People don't know. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, yes. And then it goes back to, a growing population. Anyways, this is me, my little rants. My little rants. And so you see, for example, on a consumer, and I'm always sort of looking, okay, there is the younger generation that seems to be a lot more involved and looking for that sustainability message or the more, let's say, active role. Although, you also have a massive, and I don't know about the UK, but if you follow at all American politics, there's such a dissonance between what the media feeds you, it's the left or the right? Do you see that in the UK in terms of people caring more for, as you said, brands like, Too Good To Go for that sort of sustainability perspective, or is it just a convenience, economic, or a little bit of both?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily feel like there are two sides of the media here, kind of telling different stories. I would say I'm a millennial, so I'm sat in between two quite opposing eras, I suppose. We do have the younger generation who are very conscientious about the environment and sustainability and sourcing and, their health. That's absolutely fantastic. That's great. And then you have, boomer generation who perhaps didn't really grow up with a lot of those things that we're now being told. So I feel like it's not necessarily that they are more active. I think that they've probably been given the tools to be more active, whereas maybe those things didn't exist 30 years ago. So I think it's easier now to adopt practices that look after the planet and that look after your health, and I guess that will only improve as younger generations come in. And, you probably will find that the generation in 3 years' time will think that Gen Z aren't as active as they should be. And I kind of just feel like it will go that way as those messages are more filtered into your life, into school, into your education, and the importance of them. And that will come with time, with research, with development. We're now realizing that things that we thought were good for us 50 years ago definitely aren't good for us now. And that comes with development and time. And so I think expecting, an automatic switch to happen in someone's life that isn't it's not going to happen overnight. You need to kind of give people a chance to get accustomed to it,
Yeah. I mean, in addition to food, obviously, there's so much going on. And I know you literally have written tons, for example, on packaging. And then it goes also back to that, sort of circular economy bit. What is such a huge part of sustainability, and we know the effects of it. How is that industry sort of shaping that broader conversation or the broader efforts around sustainability in the sector for food and beverage?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting developments happening in the food packaging space. Today, when I think about packaging, I think you're kind of inundated with these pictures of far-flung places covered in plastic bottles and beach clear-ups and things. And yes, that is a very dark reality. But also, I think those are the kind of messages that have made companies really think about what they're doing and how they can be a bit more sustainable. So I think it's still early days for the industry, and I don't think it's an overnight fix, but I do think the willingness and the intelligence is there. And I think every little step is going to help, There's a real kind of witch hunt against plastic. And yes, plastic pollution is a huge problem. But there is also a lot of development within the plastic space. Again, it's not going to happen overnight. So we're not just going to stop using plastic tomorrow. So how do we figure out ways of bettering the plastic that we're using? There's a lot of really great benefits to using plastic. It has a very low carbon footprint because it's not heavy. It's a very thin material, so it doesn't cost huge amounts to produce in a factory. whereas glass is very heavy and it's logistically a bit of a nightmare to transport. And it's, if you're using our PET, it is recyclable, which is great. It keeps it within the circular economy. But I think there's also a lot of innovation to be, and various sectors are getting involved. Again, in retail, you've got Tesco's here in the UK. They've introduced laser etched avocados. So they're no longer using plastic packaging and they switch to cardboard containers. And it's just little things like this that remove quite a lot of plastic from that supply chain. You also have Nestle, who just in time for Christmas have started trialing paper tubs for their Quality Street brand. Or Sainsbury's, who have just introduced vacuum seal packs for some of its meat products. And also multiple supermarkets have removed their coloured bottle caps from their milk, which again, it just saves on unnecessary parts of the whole process, really. If you're not colouring the bottle caps, you're removing that entire process, which is therefore resource efficient in some way.
Yeah.
And then you also have companies that are being really innovative with smarter materials. You've got Kelpie, who are using seaweed to create biodegradable packaging. But you're also seeing crazy materials like mushrooms, avocados, recycled fishing nets, and cellulose, and grass even, molded fibre being used. I think going back to the plastic problem, one of my favourite companies in the packaging space is a French biotech firm called Carbia. They've developed a bacterial enzyme that's capable of breaking down plastic bottles that are meant for recycling, breaking them down in a matter of hours. And innovations like this are, I think, really the way forward. They're backing the news recently because they've just opened the world's first PET recycling plant and biorecycling plants.
Yeah. And literally you can do tons of stuff in terms of the circularity of it. And as usual, saying zero plastic, it's impossible. We use plastics for medical devices, for many things that it's beyond. But the amount of plastic that supermarkets use, right? For 3 carrots. So there's a big difference there, right? You have to look at, the reality of things. One thing that we haven't talked about, which obviously it's super important, and I think also it a big contributor, I would say, the challenges that we discussed before is agriculture, right? And right now there's we talk a lot about regen ag, and from your perspective, from what you're seeing in the news, how is it sort of gaining traction? Tons of corporations obviously are starting to implement. Do you see, I sometimes feel there's going to be 2 different visions, one that it's the corporates and one that it's smallholder farmers doing, 2 different versions of what it means. As I always say, they're not all Patagonias. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, regen ag is a really, really trendy topic at the moment. And yeah, we're writing about it a lot. We're engaged in conversations about it a lot. Although it's not a new practice. Actually, the term itself was coined in around the 1980s by the Rodale Institute. But to be honest, this idea of optimizing land use through crop rotation or leaving land fallow has been around for centuries. So,
that's how we actually did agriculture.
Yeah, I guess it's come full circle, and it's now a real trend again, which is great. And I think the term today probably encompasses a lot more than it did, and focuses a lot more on the depletion of natural resources. But it's definitely the buzzword of 2024, I'd say. And I think now regen ag can probably be split into 6 guiding principles. The first being minimizing soil disturbance.
Yeah.
So avoiding excessive tilling and preserving soil structure and health. And, there are issues with how much we're using the soil and whether there are certain nutrients in our soil that we might never get back again because we tilt the land so heavily. So I think it's trying to preserve the quality of the soil as much as we can now. We then have maximizing crop diversity, so planting a variety of crops, which I also think, done well, can really help that one crop you're trying to grow as well. I think keeping that biodiversity. The same with gut health, isn't it? If you're eating 20 different vegetables a week, your gut's going to love you for it. If the land you're growing in has a huge variety of crops, it's going to love you for it. Keeping the soil covered naturally, organically, with either mulch or cover crops, which, help prevent soil erosion and water loss. And cover crops, especially in areas like places that are quite close to the equator or where the climate is very dry. Having these cover crops also creates a kind of shadow, which gives your main crops a bit more of a chance to grow. Then you have kind of maintaining living roots all year round. So ensuring that living plants are present year round can support microbial activity and keep soil fertile. And then 6, you have integrating livestock. So grazing animals, which can be used to naturally fertilize the soil by enhancing nutrient cycling.
Yeah.
The 6th, more recent principle, I think, and something you hear quite a lot about now is promoting biodiversity, fostering a wide variety of plants, animals, insects, species within an ecosystem to create balance and resilience. And I think these principles will definitely vary from company to company. Those using the land for ranching or animal farming are probably going to have very different goals to those who are focusing on vegetable and grain production.
Yeah, definitely.
However, I think these principles, when used to the best of their ability, can really help to create a more resilient and nutrient-dense food system. Yeah, so I think, although it's a buzzword, it's been around for a very long time, but I do think there is some real power behind it.
Indeed. And again, like with something that, although it's old, let's say it's new for many, right? Because we went from a very sort of linear yield heavy way to grow our food to a more holistic, more systemic view. And I think also going back to the consumer, products will have to change, right, in the future if we want to create that balance. So I think we're definitely in an exciting time to see that. So I wanted to sort of shift our conversation now that we talked a little bit about what's out there. I know that you cover a lot of investments and M&As and stuff like that. Although we had this huge bubble, whenever there's a bubble, then there's craziness, in my opinion. But how are these deals influencing innovation and the efforts of the overall industry? And also, if you have seen, compared to 4 years ago when we had crazy valuations and crazy amounts, do you find that we are getting better quality out there of things?
I think starting with the second part of your question, there seems to be a bit more of an emphasis on competition. Mm-hmm. And also really making sure that these giants aren't monopolizing a space. And I think that's really important. When you have huge companies joining forces, if we were to hear tomorrow that Nestle and PepsiCo were joining forces, there'd probably be no market left,
Yeah.
So I think it's quite important that we make sure that there is space for new entries and space for people that are doing, a commendable job. And it's good to know that there are people out there kind of regulating that. But yeah, we love a merger or an acquisition story at FoodBev, especially those that are in the billions. We're just always trying to get those written out as fast as we can. Kind of in competition with ourselves, I suppose. Can we be the first?
Have you seen the Siete 1.2 billion? Pepsi?
Yeah, well, there have been bigger ones though. Most notable this year, I think, probably Mars's acquisition of Calanova.
Yeah.
That was about 29 billion British pounds. There's also Carlsberg's acquisition of Britvic. That was about 3 billion, I think. And then in the ingredient space, you had Tate and Lyle's purchase of CP Kelco. That was quite a big one too. I feel like deals like these do enable companies to innovate more, broaden their horizons. And I think those examples that I've given in particular, I think they help to meet the rising demand for healthier and more functional food products. For example, Carlsberg, well, notoriously beer and alcohol, but this acquisition allows them to transition quite smoothly into the non-alcoholic space. And that's a hugely growing area for younger generations who are increasingly inclined to consume less or no alcohol these days. And for someone like Calanova, it presents a great opportunity to offer more ready-to-eat and on-the-go convenient options, which is, again, another huge trend that they're kind of together, with their expertise can do some real interesting things in. But I would say that I think it is also very easy to get caught up in all this news surrounding the giants of the food and beverage industry. And I think from my perspective, it's equally important to recognize the smaller companies that are out there kind of flexing their muscle. So at FoodBev, something I'm very conscious about is providing a platform for those companies, the smaller companies and the startups or the scale-ups, that actually might be better positioned for innovation and disruption because they have less hurdles to jump through and they're flying slightly more under the radar. And I'm just thinking about some of the startups that I've worked with recently. I know there's Amulet. I'm not sure if you've heard of Amulet, but they've created a wearable device designed for consumers to test for food allergens when they're kind of out and about. So, this could potentially save lives. And at the very least, it gives people more confidence to eat out, which in turn helps the economy, doesn't it? And, also curbs people's worries about whether they're going to fall ill from what they eat or worse, Or you have another one called Voyage Foods, who, they say they're on a mission to future-proof our favorite foods without exploiting source ingredients. So they're making cocoa-free chocolate and hazelnut-free spread and bean-free coffee, kind of using molecular flavor mapping to see how they can build up those flavor profiles without those key ingredients that are so resource intensive and expensive as well. They're expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And more recently, I was writing about a company called EVA Biosystems a couple of weeks ago, and they're a startup based in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And they developed this, it's like a novel plastic material that self-destructs in marine environments without generating microplastics. And it's just little things like this that you think, wow, that's so clever and could be so groundbreaking. So I think it's really important to make sure that these smaller companies have a platform as well. And yeah, that's something I'm quite keen to promote in my role. There's so much going on. I mean, that could probably be a question of its own podcast.
Oh my God, yeah. Like going back to the trends, right? Like obviously you touched upon health and nutrition, good health, but also like the whole wearable market. precision nutrition, but also in general AI in any, I would say, part of our food system. How is that going to transform our food industry?
My feelings towards AI are this. You either need to master it or it's going to master you. And I think it's going to become essential to learn how to work with it rather than against it. Because it runs the risk of making you redundant. So I think, we have a saying in our office, work smarter, not harder. And while I'm not encouraging my team to rely on AI, tools like ChatGPT to write all of their features or their news stories, I do think it can be useful for smaller tasks that are unnecessarily time consuming, like a grammar check or a spell check. You basically want AI to be able to do the mundane tasks so that you have more room for the creative stuff, I think. However, I do think it's really important to say engage brain first. AI is not always right. It's not always accurate. If your sat nav tells you to drive into a ravine, I hope you wouldn't. Similarly, if AI suggests that you create a grass and mud flavored chocolate bar, I would hope you'd think twice about that too. But it might also inspire you to think outside the box. You might consider pairing two complementary flavors together in a chocolate bar, or using natural ingredients. Or I think some common sense is going to be required there. I guess the other thing about technology is that it could also help address labor shortages, which is another huge problem in the food and beverage industry at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's both on the factory floor and in consumer-facing role. If you think about robotics, that's slightly different to AI, I know, but robotics as a technology, how quickly they can operate, and more often than not, how accurate they are. And they can pick, paste, pack, fill, bottle, whatever you need them to do with precision. And then in the kind of more consumer-facing roles, they can now serve customers. They can make a drink. They can cook pizza. They can flip a burger. They can even deliver takeaways to your college dorm room, like Uber have done recently with their robots. So I think the potential here is immense, and I think it's only going to get more exciting.
Oh, yeah. There's so much stuff out there. That's a lot. So obviously, and again, if we look at AI, we look at robotics, with the same conversation as we did with, alternative proteins. There's always that consumer is at the center of adoption, or the worker is at the feelings of, or special training or whatnot. So that's where I wanted to sort of dive in a little bit, which is the media. And obviously, you guys do a great job. You're in this space, this space. But it's crazy, the amount of stuff that sometimes you hear that it's completely not true, or even like something that we all get, but that needs to sort of be told a little bit differently to a possible consumer. What do you see? Maybe what are we not doing enough in the sense of not just the media, but anybody who talks about this in terms of maybe creating that narrative that we do need change? Or are we doing everything perfect? And what are the topics that you think are gaining the most traction and are sort of maybe easier to start with?
Yeah, I think I would begin by saying that there is a deluge of information out there. You're bombarded with information. You're bombarded with content. It's almost like if you're trying to investigate something, say you want to learn more about the effects of soy protein on your gut health, you can almost guarantee that there are, for every 10 pieces of information to say how good it is, there are 10 to say how bad it is as well. So I think getting the message clear and communicating effectively is the first task. And, that does involve, unfortunately, sifting through quite a lot of crap. And it's really unfortunate, because if we're confused, gosh knows how a consumer is feeling. And it's our job to communicate effectively. And if we find it hard, then I can only imagine how hard, someone in the general public finds it. So yeah, being clear, being simple, and being accurate is really important. I would also say that consumers want their news quickly, and they want it in small, digestible chunks. So all media really needs to adapt to those demands. And that's pretty much a result of most content going digital. This also means it needs to be visual. It needs to be suitable for multiple platforms. Thinking about the stories that we most write about in our line of work, I would say a lot of the high engagement stories revolve around new product launches. They typically generate quite a lot of inquiry, which is not ideal for us, since we do produce much longer form content as well. But that at least gives us an insight to what resonates with our audience.
Yeah.
And even though the more in-depth pieces aren't being viewed as much, they're still important, and they still are read by the people that care. I think it's balance and variety are essential. We've identified a few key areas that work well for us. And those are things like snacking, convenience, packaging stories are quite heavily engaged with. Technology, sustainability, these are all topics that are of interest to our audience. I would say multimedia content is important for getting your message across. We produce podcasts and videos in addition to the news stories, in addition to our features and interviews. And I think it's finding which formats are more convenient. It's easier to listen to a podcast in your car or during a commute. It's sometimes a bit nicer to watch a video at the end of a busy week rather than a lengthy article. So I think it's about getting that balance as well. Yeah. I think it's really important as a journalist to be using your toolkit every day. So how you search for the news, how you build relationships with industry professionals, how you keep your finger on the pulse. But also I think it's also up to us in a way to shape what the next big trends are going to be and decide on what smaller pieces might need more in-depth exploration. For example, if we notice a particular flavor trend that multiple companies are embracing, this year it might have been sour cream and chive. Last year it might have been salted caramel. The year before it might have been blood orange or chocolate orange. And we ask ourselves why that's trending. Why is that trending? Grapefruit was a really big over a few years ago. It turns out from speaking to a few manufacturers that this was because there was a massive citrus shortage around the time. And that led flavor houses to innovate with grapefruit as an alternative. It was a bit more available than, say, lemons and oranges, which then opens up a story about labour shortages and their implications for the market, or issues in supply chains for certain products. Or more recently, you've got cocoa and eggs in short supply, which is sparking innovation from multiple companies.
Yeah.
When this happens, we kind of think of new links or new angles to be taken. With cocoa, especially, that's been a huge thing this year. And earlier this year, I visited the Ivory Coast, and I got to see the journey of a cocoa bean firsthand. And I will never complain about the price of organic
Oh God.
again. after seeing the extensiveness of that journey, it's quite incredible. And I ended up writing a 5,000-word piece on that. It was almost like a diary of my stay, but it was quite information and statistics and insights from various people that I spoke to.
Oh, we'll say you'll send me the link and we'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, absolutely. I was really proud of that piece, actually. And, it's a trip I'll never forget. And it's nice to share that kind of personal experience with people, but also that it's relevant.
Yeah.
So I think these kind of origin stories and ingredient sourcing, another topic that people really like to learn about. Yeah.
And it's important. I mean, if you think about it, like we are so used to sort of cheap food, right? And that's a whole other podcast conversation. An hour-long conversation right there.
Everything has to be just right for the cocoa bean to even get to the processing facility, let alone to the part of the world it needs to go to then be turned into a chocolate bar or a milkshake. I think being a little bit more thoughtful about the intensity of that journey is quite important. So yeah, I was really glad that I could have had that experience, but not everyone's going to know that journey, and I think it's important to share it.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. So we're obviously a little bit out of time. So I had a whole bunch of other questions, but there is one that I ask all of my guests, which is, if you had a magic wand that could change one thing, what would it be?
Cool, crikey. I suppose it's going to be quite broad, but I suppose this idea that there should be enough of everything for everyone. There should be enough food, there should be enough water, technology, sanitation, home. These are things that shouldn't be lacking anymore. From a food perspective, no one should be going hungry.
Yeah.
No one should be thirsty. Wild and horrific to think that people, their basic human rights. And in 2024, I don't understand how that's still a problem for so many people. Millions and millions of people. I don't understand it. And I think, unfortunately, some corporations are greedy, and I think they prioritize profit over people and capitalizing on those in need rather than helping them.
Yeah.
We've worked against the environment rather than with it for such a long time, since the industrialization period, and we've left this path of destruction in our wake. We've degraded and deforested good soil and farmland. We've kind of left communities behind once we've exhausted their resources. Very little regard for the lives that are affected and the lasting harm that's been caused. I think it's really crucial to keep providing people with the tools they need to access food and water. But I think it's equally important for companies to remain committed to those communities, to support them and to create sustainable, long-lasting change. No one should be without food and water, and no one should be malnourished or starving because they lack food or water. It's just completely unacceptable with everything that we have today. So I think if I would wave my magic wand, it would be that no one ever experiences that again.
One of my favorite videos, like, those little ones that you see like on YouTube or whatever, was it like Julia Roberts that did the voiceover of I Am Mother Nature? Have you seen that?
It does ring a bell. Exactly what happened.
Oh, it just shows basically how bad we are.
Yeah, well, I think it's also getting the right people to display the message. Maybe Julia Roberts isn't the best position to talk about people who are starving.
No, not starving. This
probably doesn't have a clue. Or how
this was climate change. It was
right, okay.
Climate change.
I got you. Actually, I tell you what I really don't like, those videos of people that film themselves gifting things to homeless people or handing out money and food to people on the street. I just don't get that. I don't get those people. I don't understand. It just feels like a whole other level of narcissism to to me a way of capitalizing on people's misfortune again. So, yeah.
And that's another whole hour of a podcast there.
No, I'm just talking about all the things I don't like, which I don't want to do, but
I am super happy we had this conversation. I hope we'll have many more. You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about the future of food. So it's been
Thank you for inviting me on, Sharon. Okay.
Want to deep dive into food innovation? Subscribe to the Food Tech Junkies series. Tune in and listen to the industry's champions, whose mission is to reinvent our future by collaborating and disrupting the status quo as a way to rebalance our planet and our daily lives. For more great food and ag tech content, visit our website at www.edibleplanetVentures.com, and don't forget to follow us on social media.